Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Prime Minister has been urged to investigate why a British Muslim family was banned from getting on a flight to Los Angeles as they tried to go on holiday to Disneyland. Mohammed Ziyad Mahmood said US officials had not explained why his family had been turned away at the last moment, claiming it seemed like a clear case of discrimination. Asad Beg has this report.
Their bags were packed. It was supposed to be a trip of a lifetime to Disneyland. But as they were boarding, they were approached by a UK Border Force official.
He said basically they received a phone call from Washington DC stating that do not permit these people per person to board the plane because they have a problem with the ESTA.
It says, "Dear Diary, tomorrow we're going to America. I'm so excited because we're going to Disneyland."
Tariq's sister-in-law, who wasn't on the trip, showed me how her children had been preparing for their dream holiday.
There's a picture of Mickey Mouse and it says, "Mickey Mouse, I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow."
This incident comes weeks after Donald Trump, Republican frontrunner for the presidential nomination, said this.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Tariq Mahmood believes those words played a part in the family's rejection.
Why do you think that you were stopped from going to the US?
I think it's whatever Donald Trump mentioned about no Muslims should be allowed in USA. It could be, I mean, unless they let me know what I've done wrong. So far they haven't given me an explanation, so what am I supposed to think? As far as I'm concerned, and as far as I know, I have not been in trouble. I've not been stopped in any airports before. So what is the cause?
For some of the children, it would have been their first time on a plane. The experience has left them traumatized.
And we asked the airlines and the borderline control that, what do I tell my kids? They're asking me, what do I tell them? You know, what do I say? There is no explanation. You're not giving me an explanation, so what do I tell my kids? To now, I don't know what to say to my kids.
The local MP says she's heard of similar cases and has written to the Prime Minister asking him to challenge the US over the issue.
Look, there is a genuine and growing concern that some UK citizens, by dint of their faith, because they're Muslims, are finding their travel options are being limited. I've had a number of cases now come forward to me about this, so I want us to be able to answer the question confidently that discrimination isn't happening on UK shores at UK airports to UK citizens.
US authorities won't comment on this specific case, but maintain that they do not discriminate on the basis of faith, and that the burden is on the applicant to prove that they are eligible to enter the US.
Asad Beg reporting. Well, Ajmal Mastura is a London-based imam and author and was also stopped from flying to the United States last week. He'd been invited to lead Friday prayers at a mosque in New York, but when he arrived at the gate to board his flight, he was told that his visa had been revoked. Well, Ajmal Masroor, can you tell me what excuse they gave you for cancelling your visa? You had all the papers in order.
Well, I have a B1 and B2 visa, which are business visas, and obtained it about a year and a half ago after my ESTA was rejected. And after several screening interviews, they granted me visa, and I've been to the States for 5 times at least in the last 1.5 years. So they gave me no excuse whatsoever. They told me that the guy who told me that my visa has been revoked, he simply said, "I'm a messenger." When I pushed him a bit more, he said to me, "Maybe you've done something wrong." And he just walked off with a smile on his face, as though it's okay to accuse somebody of a misdemeanor without any evidence. I felt ashamed, embarrassed, humiliated in public, and I wanted an answer, and I still haven't got one.
Well, one of the things, of course, we know that the United States is doing is trawling through people's emails, Twitters, anything at all online. Do you think there's any danger that you've ever said anything which might be misinterpreted?
No. I have always been in public domain, said what I believe to be true, and I've never had anything that is, in my view, breaking any law or being offensive in the sense of being racially aggravating or anything like that. I always believe in justice, fairness, and I've called for democracy in all parts of the world. I've stood up against tyrants in different parts of the world. I've called for compassion in the world. Is this wrong? I'm also living with a death threat.
Let me suggest to you that I mean, you clearly were moving back and forth to the United States perfectly freely before this. Because in a sense, one could say that is before Trump and after Trump. Do you read here in some way that there is perhaps a neo-ban on Muslims traveling to the United States.
That's the fear, that maybe Donald Trump, without receiving a single vote from any American, has already had his policy enacted. But it has been going on silently for a long time. And this is what we need to challenge. Why are Muslims being singled out? I've been told from reliable sources that they have got no-fly personnel in the list. And in that list, vast majority are Muslims. Why Muslims?
Well, what is the evidence for that, though?
Well, people who are saying that, they need to bring it up, I agree. But the problem is, while I was standing at the airport waiting for further answers, I saw in half an hour, that person who said, my visa has been revoked, interrogating only Muslims. A girl with a hijab, a Middle Eastern man, all of them visibly Muslim. Why interrogate Muslims only? Is it by name? If my name was John
there is
Smith,
a problem here, though, isn't it? Because I mean, ISIS is a fundamentalist Muslim grouping, however much one may totally reject the version of Muslim belief that they embrace. Therefore, I guess they see a threat from the Muslim community.
just like Ku Klux Klan don't represent the Christians, or any other nutters don't, Muslims are not represented by these idiots. And we know, if America is saying we should exclude all the Muslims, are they saying all the Muslims are terrorists? It's a very dangerous precedence to
What action can you take?
I think we should lobby. People like yourself should come forward and campaign on behalf of transparency.
No, I'm a journalist, I don't campaign.
But a report about transparency, accountability, challenge people, even like me, and of course get our government to speak. Prime Minister especially. Prime Minister Cameron has a responsibility.
Are you going to write to him?
Of course, and I'm expecting him to ask embassy to apologise and of course refund my
Let us
loss.
know what he says.
Of course we will.
Ajmal Masroor, thank you very much indeed for talking with us.
We've seen significant abuse and misuse of the no-fly list. I mean, number one, just the fact that there's a secret list that the government uses to deprive individuals of their right to travel without any due process.
Of the 71,000 names on the list in 2007, roughly half of them were there by mistake.
What in the world has ever happened? Is this what happened? Try to get on the plane back to Washington. You can't get on the plane. I went up to the desk. I said, I've been getting on this plane, you know, for 42 years. And why can't I get on the plane back to Boston, back to Washington? They said, you can't get on the plane back to Washington. So my administrative assistant talked to the Department of Homeland Security, and they said there's some mistake. It happened 3 more times, and finally Secretary Ridge called to apologize on it.
It is still trending. We're talking about that 18-month-old girl and her parents who were pulled off a plane after she allegedly showed up on a no-fly list. JetBlue says a computer glitch is to blame, and the airline has apologized for the incident. But that might be little comfort to Rihanna's parents, who say getting pulled off the plane by TSA agents was humiliating.
It was an overgrown circus act, but we were the featured freak show that was put on display for everybody to come and take a look at.
So basically, the government makes a clerical error and your life is ruined. What joy.
We all make mistakes, some small, some not so small, but they usually don't cost $3.8 million in 7 years of litigation to correct. But recently, we learned that that's the price it takes to remove yourself from the government's no-fly list. See, all the way back in January of 2005, Malaysian doctoral student and Stanford scholar Rahinan Ibrahim was detained while traveling from San Francisco to Malaysia. Ibrahim had been placed on the no-fly list and was imprisoned for 2 hours, searched in a culturally insensitive manner, and prevented from accessing medication she was taking for a recent surgery that confined her to a wheelchair. Eventually, officials let her fly back to Malaysia, but she was prohibited from returning to the United States. In 2006, Ibrahim sued the U.S. government to clear her name and get off the no-fly list. But it took until January of this year, 2014, for a judge to finally rule in favor of Ibrahim and remove her name from the stigmatic list. So why was Ibrahim placed on the list in the first place? Well, according to court documents released earlier this month, an FBI agent mistakenly checked the wrong box on a terrorism form while investigating her and other Muslims in the Bay Area in 2004. Believe it or not, that's probably the most innocuous part of this entire story. See, the reason this lawsuit took 7 years and nearly $4 million of attorney time is just because Instead of just admitting the error, the Justice Department and national security officials invoked the state secrets privilege, allowing the government to withhold the reason Ibrahim was no-fly listed. Now, you might remember that Bush officials were awfully fond of this tactic when trying to get lawsuits against its administration thrown out. In fact, Obama himself spoke out against the practice soon after he took office, saying, quote, "We must not protect information merely because it reveals the violation of a law or embarrassment to the government. I will never hide the truth because it's uncomfortable." Well, I guess the horror of admitting that an FBI agent could be incompetent was just too much for Obama to handle. But Ibrahim's case is far from unique and reveals a much larger problem with no-fly list procedures. In fact, according to a government accountability report, the number of people on the government's no-fly list has doubled since 2009. And according to the Associated Press, had at least 21,000 individuals on it in 2012. Not to mention the nearly 550,000 people on the terrorism watch list, according to the FBI. Well, it's no surprise that the rapid pace of marking guilty until proven innocent people as threats is leading to some egregious mistakes, such as an 18-month-old toddler who was put on the no-fly list in 2012, or a 2010 New York to Dubai flight that was held up after a passenger was mistakenly confused with another no-fly list name. The FBI has gone even as far as using the list as a tool to threaten individuals into spying onto their own communities. As detailed in an ACLU lawsuit, Marine veteran Amir Mashai and another American, Naguib Ali Ghalib, were told by FBI agents that they would only be removed from the list if they became informants for the Bureau. So maybe it's time we call it the no-fly list for what it is. Just another pawn in the government's game of security theater.
Just lay out for us what is on this, who is on the terrorist watch list, and how has it grown?
Well, one important thing to realize is that there isn't really a terrorist watch list. There are many, many terrorist watch lists run by various agencies. In the past few years, those have been funneled into a general database called, as you said, the Terrorist Screening Database, run by the Terrorist Screening Center. But the way that people are nominated, that's the word, you're nominated to be on the watch list, is through the subordinate law enforcement agencies. So an FBI agent might think that somebody is suspicious and want to nominate them to the terrorist screening database. That's one of the reasons that the list has grown as much as it has in the last decade, because the names are coming in from a lot of different places, and most of the oversight, according to the government's own Inspector General report issued a couple of years ago, is about things like whether the paperwork is filled out correctly. There isn't a lot of oversight about things like whether the predictions of terrorist acts are actually accurate. So we don't know who's on the list, but we do know that it's a very large number of people, as you said.
Can you talk about when these lists started?
Sure. These lists started in some sense in the 90s without really that much thought about terrorism. So, for instance, one of the lists that feeds into this master list is a list called the Violent Gang and Terrorist Organization File, run by the FBI. And that list was created as a violent gang file, so Crips and Bloods and that sort of thing. And at the last minute, the FBI thought, wouldn't it be nice to have terrorist suspects on here too? And included them under the same criteria as used for the violent gangs. And many of the lists developed in this kind of haphazard way. After 9/11, they became used a lot more, obviously, and people were paying a lot more attention to them. And the process by which they were consolidated was also somewhat haphazard. I think people in the government noticed that they were checking a lot of different lists, that there were contradictions, the criteria are different, and they decided to have a consolidated watch list in the early 2000s to kind of act as an umbrella over all of these.
What are the hidden costs of these, the title of your piece?
Well, I call it the hidden costs because some of the obvious costs are obvious. That's what Rahina Ibrahim is suing about. That's what you've been talking about. People are harmed by being on these watch lists. They're harmed by being not allowed to fly. They're also harmed by being subject to a lot more scrutiny from law enforcement officers every time they run into them. So if you're on a watch list like this and you are stopped for speeding, the officer runs your license through a computer system, and he's informed that you're on the watch list, and then naturally he's going to be paying a lot more attention to you. You're much more likely to be arrested and to receive a certain kind of treatment. So those are more due process rights that may be infringed, and those are kind of the obvious costs of terrorist watch lists. The hidden costs are the systemic costs that people don't really talk about as much. Such as the effects on policy. So one of the striking things about these watch lists is that, as far as we know, there is absolutely no mechanism for the agencies who run them to assess how well they're doing. There's nothing built into the system for people to review and say, 10 years ago, we thought this was a bad guy. How did that turn out? How did our prediction pan out? And if it didn't pan out, maybe we're doing something wrong. What should we change? So one of the hidden costs is the bloating of the watch lists with lots and lots of people who are most likely or even definitely not harmful and don't pose a threat, and yet give us the impression that the main danger we face today is terrorism. If there's so many people on the watch list, must be a pretty dangerous situation. And so the hidden cost is the way that it affects our policy making and our attention and our resource distribution. We want to funnel more resources to fight this terrible threat that we face. And how do we know we face the threat? Well, there are an awful lot of people who are threatening.
One of the people who turned up on the no-fly list for suspected terrorists is this 6-year-old girl named Elisa Thomas. CNN reports the Thomas family found out Elisa was on the list when they attempted to board a flight from Cleveland to Minneapolis.
6-year-old Elisa Thomas is like any little girl.
Ta-da!
She loves her dolls, and she's already excited about the first grade. But according to the U.S. government, you should be worried about what she's up to.
I'm putting a clip in her hair.
We were like puzzled. I'm like, well, you know, she's kind of 6 years old. This is not something that should be typical. But I'm like, well, okay.
Dr. Santosh Thomas was just made aware that his oldest daughter is on the list, the terror watch list that impacts travelers who could be a threat to national security. Alyssa's parents found out at the Continental check-in counter during a recent trip from Cleveland to Minneapolis.
That was a report from CNN on 6-year-old Elisa Thomas, who is on the terrorist watch list. Anya Bernstein, what about this and how people can get off?
So I just want to say, first of all, that's not the first kid that's been on this watch list. That's been a recurring problem. If your name sounds like, matches, relates to somebody who has been part of an investigation, you're likely to end up on the watch list. There is no way to get off the watch list. I think that's the short answer. The Terrorist Screening Center has set up a program called DHS TRIPS, which allows travelers, it's the Travel Redress Inquiry Program. So it allows travelers to basically lodge not so much a complaint, but an inquiry into their status and to ask DHS to review their files. And what you get at the conclusion of that is a letter saying, we have reviewed your files, and if you were on a watch list incorrectly, then you have been taken off. It doesn't tell you whether you were, it doesn't tell you whether you are currently on a watch list, and it doesn't tell you whether you have been taken off. You'll find out next time you try to fly. But there actually is no way to get yourself off of one of these things. You can ask the agency to look.
How is the database exempt from the Privacy Act? What does that mean?
So the Privacy Act, just to back up, is the law governing how government agencies deal with information about individuals. And one of the things that it requires is it requires agencies to share information about you with you. You can request from any agency the information that it has on you, except that under certain circumstances, the agencies can choose to exempt themselves from that requirement. Something else that the Privacy Act requires is that any information that an agency has on an individual is timely, relevant, and accurate. Relevant meaning relevant to some particular government purpose. But under certain circumstances, the agencies can choose to exempt themselves from those requirements as well. And the agencies involved in terrorist database management, such as the TSC and the FBI, have chosen to exempt themselves from those requirements. There is something else they could have done, which is to say, here's what we think relevant, timely, and accurate means in the context of an arena of high uncertainty like terrorism, about which we have little information, but which is very important. Here are the standards that we will hold ourselves to. But instead of deciding to hold themselves to standards, they've decided to just exempt themselves from any standards.
I've been